I'd like to say that I'm surprised, but I'm not. Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And of course, as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Blinkist. Now, I will say this from the outset, in order to ensure that YouTube plays nice, and honestly, there's no guarantee that they will, if you notice that I am bleeping out words in this video or saying things in a roundabout, annoying way, please know that it's for the good of the colony. Also know that I hate doing it, it annoys the living crap out of me, but this is unfortunately where censorship has gotten us. Yeah! Now, most of you probably know by now, especially if you've been on this channel for any length of time, that there is this very bizarre attack happening on pudding people, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. Perhaps the most egregious of this is trying to cut off their body parts and trying to normalize abusing them. Stop this. But as with most things in the modern era, the more you look into it, the worse it gets. So it will probably come as a shock to none of you to know that academia also has its fingers in this pie. And some universities have multiple fingers in this pie, and have done for a long time. This is the weirdest analogy. And of course, while the information that we're about to discuss is widely accessible, nobody seems interested in calling attention to it. But maybe now, given some recent developments, they should and they will. But first, let me take you on a journey. A few days ago, I came upon an article with a familiar face. It discussed how a former professor who once defended fans of the playground is now working for a child safeguarding center. If you'd been paying attention towards the end of 2021, you may remember the person featured in this story, Alan Walker, who came under fire for trying to justify and normalize people attracted to kids. Walker held a position at Old Dominion University in Virginia and was subsequently let go after the firestorm came about. But now it seems that Walker has been hired by a Johns Hopkins affiliated research center that is designed to protect the pudding people from creepy sexual behavior. You see where I'm going with this? Whenever I see things like this, I naturally want to know how on earth this was allowed to happen in the first place. How not one, but two universities hired somebody like this who holds particularly questionable opinions towards pudding people and then hires them on at a research center aimed at protecting those aforementioned pudding people. Why and how? How is the question? And because you all know I err on the side of negativity, this made me wonder if there's more to this. And there is, as expected. So I thought we could take a look at Johns Hopkins and its creepy little groomy secret. But before you once again board my hell gondola and we sit down together to eat some non-creepy pie, let's hear from today's sponsor, Blinkist. I love the Stoics.
And no, that isn't a band, Stephen. They're ancient philosophers.
And you know, although Marcus Aurelius is my man, if you don't know who he is, I can't help you. I don't always have time to read his intensely dense writing. Seriously, I love reading, but sometimes I feel like I'm being waterboarded with words.
Why, Marcus? Why?
But this is why Blinkist is great. Blinkist provides 15-minute audio summaries of all sorts of books. It gives you all the key points, lets you listen at your own pace, and you can even read the summaries if you prefer that over listening. Or if you're super smart, you can do both at once. Blinkist has condensed over 5,000 nonfiction titles in 27 different categories, like politics, psychology, health, nutrition. Think of it as SparkNotes, but shorter and spoken. On the app, in the category philosophy, there's an entire section dedicated to Stoicism, which I love, which I highly recommend if you're into mindfulness and killing off your emotions. So if you love expanding your mind or just generally being smarter, then click the link in the description to test out Blinkist for 1 week for free. If you love it, which you will, use my code to access 25% off the full premium membership price. On May 12th or 13th, honestly, my laptop is still on Australian time, the Johns Hopkins affiliated Moore Center announced that Walker would be joining their team as a postdoctoral fellow. Like I mentioned, Walker, a female-to-male transgender who identifies as non-binary, was the subject of widespread controversy last year after sitting down for an interview with Prostasia. We've actually talked about Prostasia before on this channel, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, and count your blessings that you are, sorry that I'm about to shatter that for you, Prostasia is effectively an organization that is otherwise pro-fans of the playground. In the past, they've advocated for legalizing sex dolls that look like pudding people, and routinely compared attraction to children to a sexuality. It's not. Still not. Never will be. During the interview, Walker made clear that using the term MAP, or minor attracted person, as they like to be known, is very important towards destigmatization. I think it's important to use terminology for groups that members of that group want others to use for them. Walker also referred to another group, Before You Act, who is also known for pro-child enthusiast stances and advocacy. MAP advocacy groups like Before You Act have advocated for the use of the term, and they've advocated for it primarily because it's less stigmatizing. Some things are stigmatized for a reason. I want it to be clear here too that Before You Act's founder was a serial pudding person abuser who explicitly stated he did not want to stop offending towards pudding people, only normalize it. Now, Before You Act works alongside numerous universities on their research projects, including, you guessed it, Johns Hopkins. Keep this in your brain hole because it will matter in just a little bit. Walker added that sexuality can be fluid. There are many MAPs who have a range of attractions to both pudding people and adults. Yeah, cool. Some people put milk in their bowl before the cereal. Doesn't mean it's right or normal. Like I mentioned, and unsurprisingly, this interview went viral. So too did copies of Walker's PhD dissertation, which quickly began to circulate and showed that Walker had entertained theories regarding allowing fans of the playground to access high-quality, inappropriate images of children in the belief that it may reduce offending. Walker has also written a book called A Long Dark Shadow, Minor Attracted People and Their Pursuit of Dignity. Within a month of all of this taking place, Walker had resigned from Old Dominion, claiming it was because transphobic people mischaracterized the interview and Walker's previous work. Yeah. I don't think that's what it was, boss. Now, obviously, there are many conversations to be had here about this topic and about Walker, but something that's of great interest to me is how someone who holds these beliefs, who almost has, in a way, an alliance with two equally controversial and infamous and notorious child enthusiast groups, Prestasia and Before You Act, came to be hired at a research center dedicated to safeguarding children. It's worth noting that a week or so after Walker left Old Dominion University, the director of the Moore Center wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post defending Walker. Walker's research falls squarely in the field of child abuse prevention. I feel that recognizes the importance of identifying at-risk populations and figuring out how to assist them in leading healthy, non-offending lives. Child enthusiasts are an at-risk population? Am I getting this right? So here you might rightly be wondering, what do all of these obviously shady, creepy sympathizer groups have to do with an anti-child abuse research center associated with and affiliated with the prestigious Johns Hopkins University and Hospital? Why would they not only defend but also hire someone like Walker? Well, Johns Hopkins has a long history of doing exactly this kind of thing. Some of you might want to strap in for this one. Don't say I didn't warn you. Some of you might remember a video I made some time ago about a young man called David Reimer, who, after a botched circumcision and unbeknownst to him, was raised as a girl, at the instruction of a doctor called John Money. John Money was a sexologist and psychologist from New Zealand who, in a way, I guess, was almost the godfather of the gender identity discussion, and he worked at Johns Hopkins. Now, to start with, Money believed attraction to pudding people was a harmless sexuality, which, when practiced properly, led to the child suffering no harm. Money's theories on the matter were so sympathetic that his work is still featured on child enthusiast websites such as the North American Man-Boy Love Association. For a normal person, this is not something that you'd want, to be viewed as sympathetic to the electric chair elite. In 1991, Money was interviewed and featured in a child enthusiast psychology journal called Paedica. Sorry, Greek people, I know I'm butchering this, but what do you want from me? Anyway, this is a Greek word meaning boyish, which is also coincidentally used by wood chipper activists to refer to the younger party in an age-inappropriate relationship. In the Paedeke interviews, Money said that he would never report offenders to police given that he views adult relations with pudding people to be normal and beneficial. In a quote he said, "If I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted toward a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call it pathological in any way."
This needs to stop. Now!
This sincerely makes me so uncomfortable. While these comments and views are obviously not okay, and there are many more of them, this, believe it or not, pales in comparison to what Money did to David Reimer and his twin brother Brian. Money essentially used the boys as a science experiment to prove that gender is malleable. He used one brother, Brian, as the control. Brian was raised normally, as a boy. And the other twin was raised as a girl, including being given cross-sex hormones and having his male anatomy removed. The boys were forced to see Money frequently for follow-up assessments. During the assessments, he would subject them both to disturbing experiments. They were forced to replicate sexual intercourse with each other, touch and inspect each other's anatomy, watch inappropriate films together. Money would also show them explicit photos of pudding people and adults in magazines. Sometimes he'd make them do these acts in front of several other adults. Other reports state he'd take photos and videos of the children as they engaged in this behavior. The twins at the time were only 6 years old. Eventually, after years of misery and sadness and never feeling quite right, David confronted his parents and they told him everything, that he wasn't a girl, that he was in fact born as a boy, and for him, he felt enormous relief. At the time, he was 14 years old. Both boys took their lives in the early 2000s. Their parents say it was because of the trauma inflicted on them by John Money. If you kind of think about it, and Money is actually the godfather of all this gender stuff, then it kind of makes sense why it's gone utterly, completely off the rails. It was never even on the rails to begin with. Although his theory about gender being a separate entity to sex was ultimately proven untrue, and despite his abject failure, Money's research is still hailed a success. His findings were used in later studies to justify surgeries on children, and are still used today in gender clinics all over the place, the first of which was established by Money at Johns Hopkins in 1965. Now, Dr. Money was not a good human. I think that much is clear. And yet he found a home, a very comfortable home at Johns Hopkins. But as disturbing as all of this is, Johns Hopkins had another colorful resident by the name of Fred Berlin, who, I don't know, maybe might have even been worse than John Money? I'm not sure, it's hard to say. Berlin, who has been with Johns Hopkins since 1978, was also mentored by John Money in 1975. He founded the Johns Hopkins Sexual Disorders Clinic in 1980 and specializes in the treatment and evaluation of patients with disorders such as pudding people attraction, voyeurism, and exhibitionism. Why do you keep hiring these people? But Berlin, similar to Money, was not content just floating around at Johns Hopkins, smelling some flowers, drinking some coffee. No, he needed to make his mark on the world. In 1987, Maryland introduced a law requiring physicians to notify police if they were aware a patient had abused a pudding person. This sounds promising. Johns Hopkins worked with Berlin to advance an exemption which would allow him to avoid having to report these patients. This is not promising at all. Berlin issued an internal memorandum recommending that child abusers first report incidents to a lawyer, who could then refer them to the clinic for evaluation. That way, the memo explained, disclosure of the incident would be protected by the attorney-client privilege of confidentiality.
This is cancer!
I was looking to see if there was a legal way for people who wanted to seek help to come and get it without being prosecuted, Berlin said. He also argued, like many of these people do, that the threat of criminal prosecution keeps fans of the playground from seeking help. This argument won him a temporary exemption from the aforementioned law. The exemption proposed by Berlin was specifically for healthcare providers treating this group of people. It allowed them the right to withhold information from law enforcement if an abuser told them they'd harmed a pudding person. Why are these people ever allowed near anyone or anything? Why don't we send them to their home on Creepy Island? To be fair, Sydney, there was a Creepy People Island. I'm picking up what you're putting down. It rhymed with nip bean. In 1992, after so much criticism from child advocacy groups, Berlin took his clinic for sexual disorders and made it private, renaming it and all. although he did stay on with Johns Hopkins. Now, do you remember how I said we'd come back to Before You Act, the organization started by a wood chipper activist? Well, in 2011, Berlin gave a talk at a Before You Act conference. During his talk, Berlin argued in favor of acceptance of and compassion for people who are attracted to minors. He also heavily criticized the necessity of the sex offender registry. Naturally, people reacted angrily to Berlin's comments, forcing Johns Hopkins to release a statement. In it, they decried the significant misinformation circulating about Fred Berlin and his recent participation at a conference in Baltimore. As an international expert in sexual disorders, Dr. Berlin speaks routinely at conferences in his role as an individual and as an expert in these matters. In this role, Dr. Berlin speaks for himself and not as a representative of Johns Hopkins. These three people, all aligned and associated with Johns Hopkins, hired on despite the things that they've done and said, are still only 3 people. But I do wonder how many more of them exist in academia hiding in plain sight. I think it's clear that over the years, plenty of groups and organizations who say that they're for the safeguarding and protection of children have been caught red-handed indicating or outright saying that their intentions are very different. This year, a well-known professor had his research article criticizing prostasia deleted from the British Journal of Sociology and History after the organization allegedly bullied them into deleting his work. The journal argued the article was defamatory, but the professor, Alaric Norde, said that it merely looked at prostasia's so-called child safeguarding and criticized academics who do not push back against their rhetoric. It makes me wonder why academics either cannot or will not criticize the conduct of questionable organizations that other universities choose to work alongside. More than that, and besides Johns Hopkins, I would like to know who else is doing creepy things behind the scenes. In the end, I genuinely believe in protecting pudding people, but if universities and academics are working against that end, I strongly believe and strongly think that is something that we all should know. Now, before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Blinkist using the link in the description. You can try it for free for 1 week, which is super cool, but if you end up loving it, which you probably will, you can also get 25% off the full membership price when you use my code. Now, I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Firstly, does this topic make you as uncomfortable as it makes me? What do you make of the research center hiring Walker and also writing an op-ed defending the behavior and the things that Walker did and said? What do you make of Dr. Money and Dr. Berlin, who you guys should probably look into a little further? He's got some creepy other things I didn't mention in this video. Do you think that this isn't actually an issue, that universities are hiding these people? Do you think that it's not actually a big deal whatsoever and it's still a very fringe idea and this is just what academics do? They investigate things. And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you like the video, hit subscribe and the thumbs up button. If you want to leave a comment, feel free to do so. Just be respectful about it. And I will see you guys next time. Shout out to all of you awesome producers from my Subscribe Star. Just want to let you know that I love you and I appreciate you and thank you for donating.